Hi, mystery writers. Oh, it's spring here. Finally, we had the longest rainy season on record for Oregon this year. It was long. So the sun is shining. It's great. Okay, I hope you're having a great day. Today, I want to talk about um, what happens after the midpoint in your mystery because it's craziness and it's fun. Um, Mystery writers have an advantage over many other genres when it comes to keeping the middle from sagging, because up to the middle, the detective has delved into evidence and suspects and explored the victim's world. And then the essence of keeping a reader turning pages is heightened tension, and that's our main goal after the midpoint. Uh, Rather than episodic scenes where this happens and then that happens and then something else happens, you create tension by throwing up increasingly baffling obstacles for your detective. As the goal of the story is for the detective to identify and expose that villain. Um, the chapters after the crisis in the middle, your detective starts to get a glimpse of the killer's world because they're closing in on that villain. And these glimpses into the killer's world are the mystery writer's advantage, I think, because the detective enters a world within a world, because the killer's world is inside the victim's world. That's why it's so important in that first half of the story to really delve into the victim's world, because that's the place where eventually your detective is going to find the killer. So, right after the middle, in these chapters, the detective gets glimpses of the intersection between the victim's world and the villain's world. And so you want to hint at those intersections. Um, and just as you highlighted your detective's strengths at the beginning of your story, you highlight his weakness, his or her weakness, as you leave the middle. This is where your detective stumbles, they see things wrong, um, they misread things, they misinterpret clues. You don't have to make this glaring. It's just I don't know. For example, take your detective strength as far as it can go until it becomes a hindrance. And so if she's confident, take it to overconfident so she misses an important detail. Just kind of play with those character details. And then as you go, you can plant new clues to the killer's identity. Uh, as your as as your detective goes back and interviews suspects again, um, let those suspects absolutely misdirect your detective, and get your detective to look in the wrong places. In the meantime, your killer's going to start to feel the threat. They know the detective is looking. They know the detective is going back and checking facts and and interviewing suspects again. And remember, at this point in your story, your killer is one of those suspects. All right, so that's going to clue them in that your detective is on the trail, as it were. Um, so you want to make your detective work hard for every piece of information. So in the first part, when we're focused on the victim's world, people are fairly forthcoming and evidence presents itself and everything seems to make sense. It's just your detective gathering all this information and then at the midpoint realizing that they've misinterpreted that information, but at least they're gathering. Now you're going to make it harder for your detective to figure out what's important and what's not important. The aim of this section of your story is to make it as hard for your detective as possible. The closer they get to the killer, the more things get in your detective's way. The detective may find the killer's world, but your detective hasn't found the killer yet. Um, he's on the scent, but he hasn't found. Uh, you want to let the complications roll. Your detective screws up. He asks for help from the wrong people. She stumbles over her weaknesses. And so if it's bad, bring it on. This is what happens in this second section. Your detective dives deeper into the killer's world as the ultimate exploration of the victim's world. All right. So as you're developing your storyline, take some time to brainstorm some really nasty ways to confound your detective and threaten not just their discovery process, but the detective as well. Put them in harm's way. All right. It's going to take some brainstorming on your part to come up with those ways to confound your detective. So, with all this confusion, just one big hot mess, and the frustrations, uh, your detective really struggles in this part of your mystery. So, keep the story from sagging by mixing things up. And I think it's one of the things that we as mystery writers have in our favor to keep that whole middle section from sagging is there's so much that we can do to give our detective trouble. Um, the detective's opponent, remember, if you have an opponent, that's someone who's trying to keep your detective from doing their job. This isn't the villain, it's just somebody who's has it out for your detective. So your detective's opponent may unknowingly give her an insight while trying to stop her. This is all the mixing up, okay? Or her love interest may threaten to call it quits. You want to keep your reader guessing. This is what you're doing in this part of the story. It's like your reader's like, what? I thought that was all set. No, just keep throwing things at your detective. Um, uh, but of course, major overall, still want to keep your reader guessing about how the detective is going to solve all these problems and still solve the mystery. So that's what we're doing in this third act of a four-act structure. What we're doing in the third act of our mystery is keeping our readers guessing not only about how the detective is going to solve all these problems that pop up, but also how are they going to solve the mystery itself. Um, so, amidst all the setbacks, your detective gets close to the killer, and even though your detective may overlook the clues in the middle of all the confusion. The killer feels the pressure, and the killer starts to take on the role of an antagonist, a true antagonist, and actively works against your detective, even though it's behind the scenes. This is the place where you can set up how the how can I say this? Where you can set up how the villain works behind the scenes against your detective, and the detective and your readers may not understand what that villain has been doing until we get to the final end of the story, when your when your detective figures it all out and was like, oh, that's why I had this trouble. It was that this person that I thought was a suspect and is really the villain was making it hard for me. Okay, that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about today, which was getting on the other side of the middle and what you do and how you just create and compound problems for your detective while at the same time keeping them on the trail. However they get sidetracked, you want to keep them on the trail of the villain, and that final part of your story where your detective actually identifies and exposes the villain. All right, I hope that was helpful, and thank you for being here, and keep writing.